Hello everybody and welcome back to a brand new video where today it's time to have a proper big discussion about the Series 12 finale, The Timeless Children. So yes, it aired yesterday, of course. I've had another opportunity to watch the episode again to kind of formulate my thoughts about this episode a little bit more, kind of understand a little bit more of the detail that was involved in this episode, just so that I can give you guys a more in-depth, more detailed review, more thought-out review than maybe what I would have given if I'd done it last night. But I was so pleased to see the response to my reaction yesterday. It was crazy when I woke up with like 6,000 or 7,000 views this morning. Like, I was not expecting that, so thank you so much for all of you who watched it and enjoyed it. Hit that like button, all the people who commented as well. It was so great. I love reading all your comments and all your sort of excitement around the episode, really. And please do the same with this video. Do let me know your review of the episode down in the comments below, because I will be doing my What Did the Fans Think video for The Timeless Children in the next couple of days. So if you want your comments to possibly be included in that video, do let me know down below what you thought of The Timeless Children. But yes, without further ado, we may as well get into the big old review. I'm not really sure quite how I'm going to do this review. I don't think I'm going to try and keep it too linear, because it's just not, it's not an episode for that, really. I think it's kind of just an episode to kind of just get stuck into different elements and kind of discuss them, really. So that's what I'm going to try and do. We might as well at least start off by starting at the beginning. And I thought straight away the one noticeable thing was that the cliffhanger was done in a very different vein to what we often saw in the Stephen Moffat era, where usually the cliffhanger was then sort of part one would finish and then part two would pick up somewhere completely different, unrelated, and then about 10 minutes in the episode we'd go back and resolve the cliffhanger. But it seems that Chris Chibnall does two-parters very differently to that, because we saw both in Spyfall and in this two-parter that pretty much after the previously little recap bit and the title sequence, we're straight back in with the episode sort of continuing exactly from the moment where it finished in the previous one, which I personally don't mind. I quite like that we kind of pick the story up straight away rather than going completely left field and then suddenly eventually coming back to where we were. And one just little thing I just thought of that I noticed was whereas in Spyfall at the beginning of the previously recap we had the Doctor saying previously on Doctor Who, like Broadchurch style, but we didn't in this episode, which I thought was quite interesting. I don't know if that was just a stylistic choice for Spyfall, or Chris forgot that they did it in Spyfall. I think that's unlikely. But yeah, just a tiny little noticeable thing, I guess. And within this first scene, we pretty much straight away get the splitting up of the Doctor from, well, Ryan, the last companion that she's still with, which then leaves for pretty much the whole story. The companions are all separate from the Doctor, apart from a very brief scene on Gallifrey in the sort of main council room, or whatever room you want to call it that we're in. That apart from that moment, that's pretty much it. And I think that the fam are, I don't want to say they're not underused in this story, but I think the problem is they're fundamentally not connected to the main plot line of this episode, because for the majority of this story, they are literally just trying to survive being killed by Cybermen, and it feels like they are just kind of scenes that we can go to, whilst we're not to kind of space out the scenes to do with the Doctor and the Master and revealing the reveals about the Timeless Child and the past of Gallifrey and all of that side of things. Like, I feel that kind of the companions just don't really have that much story in this episode for us to really invest in and engage in. I mean, there was a really nice scene. I mentioned it in my reaction between Graham and Yaz, which I thought was a really nice, sort of emotive character moment there, where they had really Graham just commending Yaz for being such a strong individual throughout, facing everything with always being brave and strong. And I thought that just given this sort of often so little kind of screen time and moments we have between Yaz and Graham, like, I feel like that's very much something that's not been kind of tackled very much in this whole era, really, of the relationship between those two. It's just really nice to see them both paired off for this finale, and then just have some really nice character moments there as well. I was really pleased to see that. It felt like where some emotive speeches in the Chibnall era haven't always kind of, I think, been written well enough to really hit emotionally, I felt like that particular one really did just strike all the right notes to really make you feel for these characters, and really also kind of convince me and make me believe that this could really be the end of them, and kind of the foreshadowing was there that was this going to be the end of the companions, but obviously it wasn't. Seeing as I'm on the companions, I might as well talk through everything to do with them in the episode first. So they obviously, well, we see Yaz and Graham, really interesting idea, hiding in cyber suits, which was really cool and really interesting, and actually I quite like that. I mean, it's a bonkers idea for them to think of a good idea, but let's be honest, they had no real other options, so it kind of made sense. As I again mentioned in my reaction, the scene where the lone Cyberman comes around and inspects all the people hiding inside the cyber suits is such a brilliantly tense scene, because again, I've already had that set up feeling of this really could be the end, the foreshadowing's there, that it really heightens the tension I found in that scene with Yaz and Graham, that they could really be found out in that moment and killed or taken or whatever. Like, that felt like a possibility, so I felt that worked really, really effectively again in just building up and ratcheting the tension in this story, which I thought was really, really important. For Ryan, he's obviously paired off with Ko-Sharmus and Ethan, where they're basically stood by the boundary in his little sort of shacky area place that Ko-Sharmus created, and is essentially just fighting off Cyberman there for a fair bit. It's a little bit unrealistic how bad the Cyberman aim is, among other things. It feels like they've been taking lessons from the Stormtroopers, I think, in there's like so many of them firing so many laser bullet things, and yet not a single one of them hits anybody except whoever's name. I cannot remember that person who dies right at the resolution of the cliffhanger. But I'm sorry, I cannot remember her name. But she's basically the only one who dies, and it's a little bit of a shame, I think, because... Well, I think the problem was you just didn't have enough side characters you could kill off. Like, you needed to have a group of people somewhere that weren't really important characters, but characters you could just use to kill off and show the threat of the Cybermen. Because although they were a very clear and present threat in this story, like, you really felt the power of them as a warrior race and empire, they didn't kill anybody. So that, it just... their lack of aim and the fact they didn't kill anybody just takes away a little bit of the threat, I think, in this story. And just made it feel a little bit unrealistic that all of the humans were able to survive this cyber army, I think, which is kind of a shame. Though I did really like the moment when it turned out that it was Yaz and Graham and co inside the Cybermen suits that were coming to save Ryan, basically, rather than seemingly killing Ethan. I thought that was just a really, really cool sort of misdirection that I genuinely wasn't expecting during the episode. I think we'll leave the companions for now and move on to the Doctor and the Master, because obviously that is the bulk and most important part of this episode, really. So very quickly we get whisked off to Gallifrey. We get some visually stunning shots of a destroyed and ruined Gallifrey, which is really, as I say, is really visually impressive. I think this is clearly the best Gallifrey has ever looked in an episode of Doctor Who. Like, the production values they've got now means it's possible to really do Gallifrey as a planet and a city justice, I think, both in the flashback sequences and in the kind of current destroyed Gallifrey sequences, which is really, really great to see. I think the absolute kind of hero, amazing performance of the episode has got to go to Sacha Dhawan for me as the Master. I cannot understate how brilliant, in my eyes, his performance as the Master was in that episode. For me, it just he felt so completely like the Master. It felt like he brought out every single incarnation of the character in that single episode. Like, I saw Roger Delgado in that, I saw John Sim in that, I saw that Anthony in that, I saw Eric Roberts in that. I saw them all in that, in his performance in that one episode, despite the fact that he, at least has said, he's never really watched any of the previous episodes to kind of, he wanted to play his own performance, and yet, with the way it's written, the direction and his acting talent, he still managed to pull off this hundreds and hundreds of year old character, this evil villain, that's such a kind of complex villain that just is so mad and bonkers, but also so clever and scheming and devious, and yet is so powerful as well, is so power mad, and the motivations we learn about behind what he does in this episode is just so interesting as well. He can't deal with the fact that there's a part of the Doctor inside of him that's turned him to pure rage, that he can't let go, that he can't just accept. And I feel like that in the performance is just portrayed so amazingly. So I really do think Sacha Dhawan's performance is the performance of the episode. Probably Sacha Dhawan's Master is definitely one of my favourites now, just in the way his character is portrayed. I think it's just so completely the Master. As I say, it just really struck all the right notes with me. And I think in some ways that was to the detriment of Jodie Whittaker's Doctor in this episode, because as I noted in the reaction, there was a solid 30 minutes where she had barely any dialogue or barely anything to do, and it felt like the Master was the main character of this story for large portions, which part of me is disappointed about, but we did get such an amazing performance of the Master that I kind of can't be that unhappy about it, because it just was such an amazing and captivating performance in this episode that I sort of, as much as it was a shame to not have as much of Jodie, I felt like we didn't need that to make the episode work, because this Master performance was so strong and just such led the story and had such a screen presence in this episode. I think probably where the amazing great performance of the Master also kind of came to the detriment was the lack of use of Ashad the Lone Cyberman in this story. It was kind of the same problem that we saw in Spyfall with both the Consarvin and Lenny Henry's character Daniel Barton, in that as soon as the Master turned up, the kind of bigger villain will kind of just usurp the current villain of the story. So whereas pretty much for the last two episodes we've seen Ashad as this all-powerful lone Cyberman that's so determined to raise the cyber race from the ashes again, and then the Master turns up, has a little chat to him, realises his plan's a bit pants, that essentially Ashad just wants to turn the Cybermen into all-powerful, all-conquering robots. was basically his plan by using the death particle, which I do like the death particle as an idea, I must say. That was a really interesting idea that there's this thing within Ashad that completely will wipe out all organic life. I think it was on the planet they were on was the idea. And he was going to use that to kind of become all powerful and become this robotic race, which kind of defeated the point of the Cybermen because they were half human. But then they had no emotion, so I guess what was the point of being human? But clearly the Master didn't really think that was a bit of a stupid idea, and I can kind of see it. And so he pretty quickly just wipes out Ashad and turns him uses tissue compression eliminator and turns him into a little doll. Which means that, yeah, we kind of throw away that villain in this episode, which I think is a shame because he was a very interesting villain as a Cyberman, one that we hadn't really seen before because he had he had that emotion in him that just made him so much more interesting than a standard Cyberman. And I really liked that, and I was hoping we would get more development of that in either this episode or even if he'd stayed over to a future episode as well. So, I think it is disappointing that that's gone and he's been blown up and he will never be seen again. And I think that was a little bit of a letdown in this episode. But I think it also just once again showed the absolute ruthlessness of this particular incarnation of the Master. Whereas previously we felt they were starting to get a little bit, not good, but they were starting to, I don't know, be a little bit more compassionate in certain moments. Whereas I feel like with this Master, we've gone back to complete ruthlessness. He will, no holds barred, just kill people or miniaturize them and kill them, essentially. No matter who they are, what the situation is, he'll just do it. And I think I really like that in the Master's character, that he is just totally evil and ruthless. But there are other layers there that were explored in this episode and show the motivations why I think he's been kind of driven to this. And I think that's why he's kind of who he is now, because he's been driven this way by finding out this lie of the timeless child and finding out that there's a part of the Doctor inside him has just driven him even more insane than ever before and even more full of rage and anger than ever before, and that's why he kind of lets that out on the Doctor and on the people around her, and wanting to just destroy Gallifrey and destroy everything, be the ruler of the universe. He's got to be the more special person. He can't bear the idea of the Doctor being the special one, and I think that's just such a great idea that's just so brilliantly explored throughout this episode. So I think it's about time we talked about the timeless child and all the flashback, revelations, everything you think you know is a lie explanations that we got in this story, which have proved controversial. I knew that would be controversial realistically. Tackling anything about the lore like this was always going to cause division in the fandoms. Division, there we go. But overall, I liked it as an idea. I think it worked. I think it was an interesting explanation as to how the sort of start of Gallifrey and Time Lord society really happened, in that there was, the Gallifreyans were basically nothing in the past. The Shabugans, I think they're called, apologies if I pronounce that wrong, the sort of original Gallifreyan race, basically, before they were the Time Lords or anything special or important. Then this explorer Tectian goes and finds this mysterious boundary to another alternate universe, dimension, world, leaving it completely open is the worthwhile point there, where we find the timeless child, who turns out to be the Doctor, who can regenerate endlessly, essentially, and has this power, this gift of regeneration that is finally extracted and is able to be used by the Time Lords to create, or used by the Gallifreyans to create the Time Lord race. And I said in my preview video that I thought the important thing about any revelations to do with this was that it didn't just detail everything, that we didn't just get here's how the Doctor was born, here's who they were as a child, here's what planet they're from, here's what originally happened to them, here's how they grew up, here's how they turned into the first Doctor, and everything was just spelled out on screen in flashbacks. Then that takes away all the mystery of the character you've ever had. Whereas I feel this episode did the opposite. It added even more than ever before in terms of mystery to this character. Now we don't know where they're from. We don't know anything about the original race of people that she was part of. Back when she was the timeless child in this alternative dimension, where was she? Where'd she come from? We don't know anything about that, and maybe that's something that will be explored. Maybe that's something that will be left forever. I really don't mind, because I feel like that's an important thing to have, that she is some mysterious being from another world that we'll never know about. In many ways, that almost links back to the very original idea of William Hartnell's Doctor, where he was just some mysterious alien traveller from a distant world that we didn't know anything about. I think that is actually quite cool and interesting. And I really like that they kind of stopped short of showing pretty much anything of the kind of lifespan of the Doctor before she became the William Hartnell Doctor. As far as we can know, is a lot of stuff happened between what we saw of the Doctor or the Timeless Child's initial kind of getting this whole meeting about becoming part of the division and doing presumably some bad stuff in all of that, and what eventually becomes the Doctor's we think mind being white, becoming a child again, and growing up to being the William Hartnell First Doctor. That is all completely kind of left and redacted, I think was the phrase they used, and I really, really like that because it means that complete mystery is still there. It opens up so many more possibilities about the previous history of the character. But in my opinion, this is my opinion, it does not in any way devalue William Hartnell as the First Doctor, because he is still the First Doctor. He is still the first of the lifetime that the Doctor that we know really knows anything about. And the kind of main lifetime of the Doctor, if you want to call that, of the Doctor as a Time Lord almost, rather than the Doctor as this mysterious being that we had previously before that in this mysterious past we probably will never know that much about. So I really, really feel that it worked from that point of view, and that it only expands the mystery of the character rather than kind of giving away everything or spoiling anything or ruining any canon or anything like that. Of course, it presented the really cool opportunity to make things like the Morbius Doctors canon, which I'm a nerd, I'm a Doctor Who nerd, so I love. It's great fun. It's just hilarious that now we can have all these canon incarnations of the Doctor from that period of time that we don't really know anything about. It was really nice to see the Ruth Doctor turn up again for a brief moment. Certainly the strong hint is that she was a pre-Hartnell incarnation. She was part of the division. I think that fits with what we heard about in Fugitive of the Judoon when she talks about how she's employed in a job that she can never leave. And I think that's where she's running from the Time Lords, because she doesn't like being part of this division. Presumably they're making her do some quite bad stuff when she's having to interfere in other peoples and planets that supposedly nobody knows about her doing, but actually she's doing that. And I feel like at some point when we meet her as the Ruth Doctor in that episode, she is kind of rebelling against that, has decided actually no, she doesn't want to be a part of this anymore. And she is trying to run away from the Time Lords, which is exactly what we see, which is of course what the William Hartnell Doctor did in the very first place, stealing a TARDIS and running away. So there's just such those same parallels between these kind of almost two lifetimes of the Doctor we've got scrambled into one, I think, there. So I really feel like that all works quite effectively, and I do really believe the Ruth Doctor is the Doctor when we see her in that moment, having that little sparring moment with Jodie Whittaker's Doctor. It felt like a really great scene where they were trying to kind of hint at things but not give away anything too explicitly, because you've got to keep that mystery. And it's still, I guess, possible that the Ruth Doctor is a future incarnation of the Doctor, but I feel like with the little hints and tidbits they've given, it would make a lot more sense for her to be a past incarnation, not a future one. The other interesting and slightly confusing part of this story was, what was that all about Brendan that we saw last week? I think the first thing to say is we didn't really get any full, clear explanations of that, because this was part of the kind of mysterious redacted bit. It was almost like a hidden file that was kind of glitching through from the redacted area of the Matrix, I think is a good way to put it. I do really like the idea that the Master was kind of slotting it in, sort of zapping it into her brain, the Doctor's brain, during the last episode, basically, which is why we saw the flashbacks interspersed in that episode, because we were kind of seeing the Doctor's mind and seeing these weird moments of islands that are being slotted into her memories. And so I thought that was quite an effective explanation. In terms of what it all actually means, I don't think we have a 100% clear and accurate explanation as to why. I think the first thing to say, at least from my perspective, is that Brendan himself, looking visually like that, is not an incarnation of the Doctor. They explain how the visual field had been sort of scrambled or adjusted or something. There was a visual filter on it, I think was the phrase the Master used, on this, what they call flashback scene, which essentially means that at least what we see in terms of the people is not the reality of the situation. And I think that what it's at least supposed to be, or is trying to be, is sort of a sort of memory kind of timeline flashback of a lot of history of the timeless child growing up, kind of in a coded message, but a visual coded message, because the Master talks about decoding that message. And I think that's what they're trying to show us with this scene. I think that the Brendan scenes are kind of like an amalgamation of different parts of the Doctor's previous life kind of put into one flashback sequence. So I think that the working for the police is kind of a comparison to the timeless child Doctor being employed by the division and working for the division. And I think the idea of Brendan dying and then reviving himself is kind of a representation of what we saw with the girl, or the original timeless child falling off the cliff, dying and then regenerating. Given they used exactly the same shot as well, I think the idea was that that's kind of representing that. So it's kind of all these memories kind of slotted together into one flashback that doesn't make much sense last week, but then when you kind of decode into it and try to understand it, it does start to make a little bit of sense. And I think the ending bit of those Brendan scenes where they say thank you for your services I'm afraid you won't remember this, and then his mind getting wiped, and I think that, and then linking back into the beginning where we see him as a child, I feel like that's kind of showing us what happens at the end of the Timeless Child's incarnation or lifespan before they are then mind wiped and turned into a child as the first Doctor, I think is what we're trying to get at. I think ultimately it's a scene that's very open for interpretation, and maybe we will get more of an expansion on that in the future. I really don't know whether they're going to go down that route or not, or whether it will always just be left a little bit open and a little bit mysterious. But I think the important thing to say is that Brendan is not an incarnation of the Doctor. It is very much a amalgamation of flashbacks from the Timeless Child's lifespan, showing different things happening in a metaphorical sense that almost the Doctor and the audience have got to try and kind of unlock. But I'm not going to deny it's quite a complicated and convoluted way of doing it, where they're very much trying to give you kind of clues and hints, but in a very muddled way where they don't really want to actually give anything away, I think. So hopefully that's given you some help and some understanding of exactly what the Brendan scenes were all about. I do think it's a bit confusing. I do think it wasn't necessarily a brilliant idea to put it into episode 1 when it's not really expanded on in the finale all that much. It's kind of all just, well, this is all a bit mysterious and you've got to try and read between the lines quite a lot to try and guess and work out exactly what it all means. I thought that was a bit of a weird way to do it. So I kind of do like I liked it in part 2 that we saw these flashback scenes and it was a sort of metaphor, false memory of the Doctor's that she's sort of been given about her past, but I don't feel like it was necessary to have as much of the previous episode devoted to that. I don't think that was just really a requirement of the story. Moving on, I did love the scene where we saw the Doctor, the Jodie Whittaker's Doctor, because we've got to clarify now there's so many different versions of the Doctor or the Timeless Child or whatever in the story, which is really quite confusing and a struggle to keep track of it, but I love the scene where we have the Doctor Who theme playing and sort of flashbacks of the last couple of series and then all the Doctors, even the Morbius Doctors and those of aliens and monsters. It was just a brilliant, and yes, it was fan service. I'm not going to try and deny it. It was, but I really enjoyed it. It was an iconic scene that I just loved seeing. It was just really, really exciting to just get those memories, those reminders, getting a feeling for all these new canon Doctors of sorts that were in the past lifespan as well, and just a great way for the Doctor to kind of escape the Matrix, basically. I thought that was really, really effectively done. We should also probably talk about the Cyber Lords. The whole kind of final plot line of this story was the Master ascending to greatness with the dead bodies of the Time Lords, which he was combining with cyber technology to turn them into basically regenerating Cybermen, so we're going to call them Cyber Lords even if he didn't in the episode. And it's a bonkers idea. Again, it's a wacky, crazy idea that I actually really, really like. I think it's really, really an interesting one. It was kind of a shame, I think, that they were basically destroyed and wiped at the end of this episode. I felt it almost would have been better if they carried on as a threat into the maybe next series. I feel like it could have had some dangerous dangling plot threads hanging over to series 13 if they hadn't all just been wiped out at the very end of this episode. Yeah, it was probably a little bit wacky and silly seeing the silly Time Lord headpiece thing on those collar piece thing on them as well. That was maybe a step too far, but I guess they just wanted to use the visual symbolism of they are still Time Lords as well as Cybermen. But seeing a regenerating Cyberman is not really something I ever thought I was going to see in Doctor Who, I must be honest. And I do really, really love the final confrontation between the Doctor and the Master, where the Doctor's got her basically bombed to kill everything, including herself, and she's holding a thumb on it. I mean, obviously we know she's ultimately not going to do it because she's the Doctor. She can't. We know because the show would end if she died, and that's not going to happen. But we also know that she just couldn't do it because that's not her as a person. Maybe the War Doctor would have done it, but she wouldn't do it because that isn't the Doctor. But I loved that scene with the Master where the Master just desperately wanted to believe that the Doctor could be like him, could be the one who actually is as kind of destructive as him. You can see he was desperate for her to do it, to just have that moment of, even though he knew he was going to die in that moment, he would be satisfied because he knew the Doctor would be dead as well and the Doctor would be like him. That's all he really wanted, and I thought that was so excellently performed and portrayed in the end of that episode. I really, really enjoyed that moment. And then that sort of frustration and disappointment when the Doctor didn't do it in the end, and the Master's like, oh, why couldn't you just I almost thought you were going to do it this time, but just still couldn't quite do it. I thought it was a little bit random and not that satisfying that Ko Sharmas then turns up and is the guy who actually blows up everything. It just felt like that. I didn't feel really earned as an ending. I didn't really care about Ko Sharmas as a character. It felt like he was just an indispensable character to resolve the plot. Almost, it felt like maybe one of the fam should have been the one who'd done that, sacrificing themselves to save the Doctor, because they care so much about the Doctor and they know the Doctor is so important to the universe. I feel like that maybe would have been a more satisfying way to conclude it than just having Koshamas do it. But there was one little hint to also the Master being able to escape. Just as the Cyber Lords have all shot Koshamas, he falls to the ground. Just before his finger hits the trigger, I think the Master, I think you can only really pick it up in the subtitles if you listen really carefully on headphones. He says something like, "Quick, go this way with me," or "Follow me this way," which I'm guessing maybe there's a TARDIS very nearby that at least the Master legs it into and escapes before the planet blows up, or before all the organic matter even is wiped from the planet. So that obviously we will then see him again in the future, I'm sure. Though this does pose some quite interesting and potentially worrying questions about the Doctor's planet and Gallifrey and the Time Lords, because essentially it's supposedly wiped out the Matrix, it's wiped out all Time Lord memory and being and consciousness and everything, which is really quite a major kind of destruction of the show. I mean, I do hope that at some point in the future the Time Lords do return in some form, because I feel like it's such an important thing to have that we can't just lose them completely. And I'm going to do a video about it as well, looking at what's next for Gallifrey, so I won't go too deep into it here. But it certainly was quite a bold decision to completely destroy and wipe everything from Gallifrey in this episode. But as we've seen in the past, things can be retconned. And so that brought us towards the conclusion of the episode. We see the fam turning back up in 21st century Earth, UK again, in their house TARDIS, and are looking a little bit sad about things because they don't know where the Doctor is or what's happened to her or anything. The Doctor escaping in the tree TARDIS, getting back into her own TARDIS, and then we go full-on RTD mode by having the Jadoon turn up, finally capturing the fugitive that is the Doctor, and she gets trapped in a prison. And bye-bye, that's the end of the series, which was just, as I say, completely an RTD thing to do. Like, just think Series 2 or with Donna, Series 3 with Voyage of the Damned. It's just a classic thing for RTD to do, so it was quite fun to see. I quite enjoyed seeing that again, even if it's going to take 10 months to be resolved. And so I think that mostly covers a lot of this episode. I feel like I could go on forever about this episode because there is so much packed into it. I know this video's already probably been ridiculously long, and I'm sorry. I hope if you're still here, hats off to you. Thank you for watching, because, like, there's a lot in this episode to talk about. But overall, I did fundamentally enjoy this episode. I feel like it was a satisfying conclusion to the series. It really did tie up a lot of the plot threads of the series, all various dangling things. It added some new continuity to the show, but not in a way that breaks anything from the past or devalues or ruins anything from the past, in my opinion. And so I was very pleased with the way they did that. It was a risky thing to do, and I wasn't quite sure whether they pulled it off, but I personally feel they have pulled it off. And so that does complete Series 12 of Doctor Who. I personally have really enjoyed this series. I feel like it's been a huge step up on the disappointment that was Series 11. There's no denying Series 11 was poor and a disappointment, and I'm just really pleased to see that it's taken such a step forward in Series 12, back to more of the Doctor Who I know and love, that I've been really excited for every single week to be able to theorise about, do loads of videos about. It's been such a fun, sort of enjoyable journey on my channel as well, to be able to just do so many videos for you guys about it. It's been really, really fun. I'd love to hear your comments down below about this episode, about Series 12 as a whole, anything you have to say, I'd love to hear them. And I will be back again very soon. There's still going to be a few more videos to come. Of course, I'll be doing the soundtrack to the episode hopefully tomorrow. I'll have my What Do the Fans Think video pretty soon as well, and just a few other videos around the end of the series and a proper big Series 12 review to come. But I hope you guys have enjoyed this video. As always, hit that like button, that subscribe button if you're new here, and I'll see you again very soon for another one. Goodbye.